sister.
Hi, Josh.
Hola, hola. Josh, you Seth.
Pardon me. I got all the geek set. I gotta have the coolest gadgets. Good. Let's play Pokemon with your phone.
Let's you play what?
Buzzing right now.
Say what?
It's so buzzing. That means there's either Pokestop or Pokemon nearby, and you throw up. I just caught that. The rainbow means I just caught a Pokemon.
So it still has like odds on it?
Oh no, actually I checked into a
And look, it goes to his watch.
Yeah, so if I buzz over here, then I press the button, then my phone, my watch buzzes. Ultimate Geek Pens. Very hard to get. You have to buy them like black market on eBay because they're also that hot. So I got one for me first. Now,
And then no.
Now I go to do my kids. They'll get them.
I'm shocked. No, I didn't take that.
No, I didn't try. And there's some extras for Pokemon Go Plus. So, the way to get them is on eBay. If you want to do like ultimate, serious, go to eBay. They're supposed to be $35, I paid like $80, so you pay the going rate. And you get into this, you order them. Like, because nobody has them. That's what's so cool.
I
had it at the White House for like set myself on. It was so deep.
I went to dinner with two friends who have the kid who's and they're like, you look at it, when I just started playing Pokemon, but yeah, I guess you got when I was done, that's why.
Cool.
I'm well on yourself. It's the latest thing that we're working on that you have people doing something and other people doing something.
Hey, what's up, dude? Good to see you. Thanks for coming. So, you know, at Capital Factory, just with downtown parking, it always takes a few extra minutes. So we're going to give, what time is it? We said we're going to give till 4:10. But there, yeah, 3 more minutes. There's some pops and some beers and some snacks in the back if anybody wants to grab anything. Exactly. Except Justin. Except Justin.
Oh, come on.
All of these chairs work too. They are functional. I feel like we should take the front row out.
Yeah. No, but then everybody would need one more bag. So.
Here's more photos.
Yeah.
I like all your keys.
Yeah.
I'm all ready to keep it back.
Josh, you're on Twitter?
Apparently they're not.
So Blake, is that I'm gonna
Check it out. First September.
First time?
Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna start.
We're gonna get going?
Yeah.
Trust me, I understand why.
So, why don't you know? I just want to start. This.
Let me know if you need IT support.
You know how I am, so I would. Why did not sit over here?
I got it.
Here we go, here we go, here we go.
You need audio?
Yeah.
Yes.
It worked a minute ago.
This one, it's on over here.
But no
It's just not-
sound.
Here, let's do it.
Your sound. Morning.
Chris is the first transgender athlete to make the men's national team. Hey Chris, how'd you know you'd be?
Oh, and I shut it off. Sorry. Maybe.
Yeah, but how? This is Chris Mosier. Morning, Chris.
Morning. I didn't do that.
Wonder why it's doing that.
Be fast enough to compete against men.
Alright, I'm gonna start one more time.
This is Chris Mosier. Morning, Chris.
Morning.
Chris is the first transgender athlete to make the men's national team. Hey Chris, how'd you know you'd be fast enough to compete against men?
I didn't.
Or strong enough?
I didn't.
Yeah, but how'd you know the team would accept you?
I didn't.
Or that you'd even be allowed to compete?
I didn't.
That must have been tough. Didn't you ever just want to give up?
Yeah, but I didn't.
You know, I just love that things have come so far. Thank you guys for being here. My name is Eugene Sepulveda, and I'm one of the directors at Capital Factory, so I'm going to moderate today and to introduce you to dear friends. So we've got Seth List, got Amie Freetly, and Heather Brunner.
Hi, everybody.
And I want to, in the three of us, or the four of us talked about this, you know, I have some friends that have come here that have said, you know, I don't really know anything about the trans community, but of course I want to be able to be supportive. And there's sometimes you don't know what questions are right, what questions are wrong. What I have learned from Seth and Amie is that they will tell you. And so when we get into the Q&A, we'll consider this a safe place. There is live streaming going on, but you guys aren't being streamed. It's being streamed here, so that's happening. You know, I want to ask Seth and Amie to talk a little bit about first getting involved in tech and coming out as trans. So why don't we start with your story, Seth?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Bay Area. I've been living and working in Austin, in the tech community, since 2008. On a limited disclosure basis regarding my gender identity. So what that means is just that all my legal documentation says Seth when I interview and take a job. No one is the wiser unless I choose to disclose. And so I've done that historically in a fairly limited capacity. I'm a sales guy, so relationships are kind of my job. They're literally my job. And so I think I'm a pretty good judge of character and come out in limited capacity once I've established a relationship with someone. Kind of leveraging it as an opportunity to create some awareness. I think people are generally afraid of things they don't know. And when they get to know me first and then find out that I'm trans later, it often changes perspective. So these days, currently, I'm at Student Loan Genius, running a small sales organization there. Yeah.
Why? So Seth was at the what was the event? It was another panel on gay LGBTQ. So during Pride Week, and someone asked a question about trans, and it was Melanie and I on the panel, and I looked at Seth, and you know, I didn't know whether he wanted to talk. He eventually did talk, and after we said, why don't we put together a panel about trans issues in the tech place? So we'll come back to some of that. Amie, you want to tell about yourself?
Sure. So I am a software engineer. I worked at moovel North America. We're right across the street. And I sort of came out in between jobs. I had a position at a company where I didn't feel safe coming out while I was transitioning, and then started interviewing as myself, and then basically struggled through some companies that were less accepting before finding moovel, who has generally been really awesome at it. So I've been.
You don't have to say that just because you're boss.
No, I mean I'm gonna tell stories about lots of good things that have happened there. So you know, I've been in tech for about 8 years. I came from the world of architecture. So
Cool. Heather, why did you want to? You had to change your schedule. Why did you want to participate in this panel?
Well, I think it's very important for all of us in the tech community, or just leadership in general, to be working towards a more accepting, inclusive workplace. And so I think that for us at WP Engine and also my role at Bizarre Voice, creating an environment where people could really be themselves is really important, and across all different kinds of spectrums. I have personally been a part of helping and being a support and ally to multiple people who have gone through a transition, and so I just felt like it was important to just represent on behalf of our leadership that we need to. This is important. It's important for us to be sensitive, to be allies, and to create an environment where people can feel comfortable. Because it takes tremendous courage to go through a change like this, and it takes tremendous courage to, for example, for Amie to go in the middle of making a transition or change, to go and find a workplace that will be accepting, and to honor her for who she is, and for Seth to honor for who he is. It takes a lot of courage and commitment, and so I think it's incumbent upon us to how do we help meet people where they are, be patient, be helpful, and be supportive.
Why is it important? Just because it's the right thing to do, or from a business perspective? Is there a bottom line perspective to it?
Well, I think there's, I think overall is that workplaces that are inclusive, more diverse, are higher performing. They're more creative. You bring out people's best. And if, for example, if Amie is worried about her gender identity at moovel, she's not going to be as productive, and not be herself, and not be as creative, and not be as open to be part of the overall team and culture. And so I think that allowing all people to be themselves is good for business. It's good for your culture. It's good for your overall environment. And it is also the right thing to do. It's 2016, and there's still a lot of inequalities that are we shouldn't tolerate.
So we thought what we do is kind of follow a format of the interview, the onboarding process, a safe place that fosters productivity, and then what are workplace issues, and then we'll end with what does it mean to be an ally? Somebody wants to go with us there. So talking about interviews, both of you have good interview stories. Who wants to tell their interview stories first?
Sure, I'll start. So, in the process of interviewing, I've had places where, the conversation was sort of awkward, where I could tell that, either I was being directly misgendered, being referred to as a man, or, where I could tell that people were uncomfortable. And one of the things that happened at moovel was that, as I interviewed with the engineers, a lot of them were confused about my gender identity, but then they asked our CPO to actually ask me. And so he said, I see that you're dressed a certain way. What does that mean? And that gave me an opportunity to come out and say, like, hey, I am a transgender woman. Please refer to me as a woman. Use she and her pronouns. And that kind of set a tone for, after that, everybody knew how to react to me because it was out in the open. And so, and it was certainly a welcoming atmosphere after that. So.
Cool. Seth?
So, just a little bit of backstory on me personally. I lived my life as an out lesbian for 10 years before I transitioned. So I was very out and very visible. Transition for me was a conscious decision about how active I was in the community versus how much investment I put into my career. So I transitioned on the job. I moved back to San Francisco, and I had been going by a nickname that was just not work appropriate, and hadn't quite figured out who I wanted to be, what I wanted to be called. So I interviewed for a job with a recruiting firm. Initially they were looking at me to place me with one of their clients, and ended up interviewing me for a job in-house. And I just used my first two initials. So on my resume it just said SM List. And so I met with this recruiter, and she's like, we have no jobs for you with our clients, but we might have a position for you here. Go meet with the CEO. So I get thrown into a conference room with this little fast-talking Italian guy, pulls out my resume and looks at it, and the first thing he says is, what the hell do I call you? And it caught me so off guard. It was not an interview I was prepared to take when I arrived that day. I was still very much female-bodied, right? I hadn't started hormones or had any surgeries or anything. And we just had a very candid conversation. I said, my birth name is Sarah, but I prefer to go by Seth. And that was it. And he never questioned it. He introduced me, he hired me, he introduced me to everybody as Seth. If you don't mind, I'm kind of pivot into onboarding, but I took the job. A week into the gig, Mark walked by my desk and he set a box of business cards down. I'd never in my life had business cards with my name on them, much less Seth, and he put my preferred name on my business cards, and it was such a small thing, but so incredibly meaningful to me. I knew in that moment that he had my back and that I had his full support in the business, and it was really powerful.
Amie, what about your onboarding?
Yeah, similarly.
Other
I
than
mean-
moving into a building where the walls are falling down.
No, I mean, at that point, it wasn't raining in the building yet, so. But, yeah, you know, certainly, like, having had that conversation with Salit, like, you know, I then felt strong enough to go and talk to, you know, everybody and say, like, hey, like, my documentation doesn't match the name that I would like you to address me by. And so I was able to, you know, sort of have that strength to say, like, hey, please refer to me this way. And yeah, and I mean, you know, everything really was handled very well. Like, you know, people were like, okay, we're gonna put this in, you know, this place for HR purposes and for payroll, and that is the last that anybody's gonna see it. Because, you know, as a trans person, you know, I worked at moovel for a year before I was able to have the resources to change my name and gender on my identification. You know, for most people, it's a significant step because you have to go through like multiple doctors to get the documentation that you need to go and present to a judge, and then after there's a cost there that's hundreds of dollars. That's, you know, that's an issue for, you know, for a lot of people, and then, you know, then you have to go through and change it on everything else, and it's still going to show up in little tiny places that you didn't think of. So.
Heather, what, you know, as a CEO of an organization committed to inclusion and diversity, what do you think about in terms of WP Engine being a welcoming environment?
Well, I think it just, you know, from the standpoint around, I think there's kind of a saying like leadership is not position, leadership is action. So I think kind of that standpoint around how do we lead through our actions and show that we're creating an open environment. So for us, how do we know that? So in terms of our employee engagement, people willingness to share and refer other people. So, you know, more than 40% of our employees come referred by other employees. And so if people see people like themselves thriving and they feel accepted, they then tell their friends and tell others and just kind of are an advocate for us in the community. And so to me, that, you know, us walking the talk every day about making sure that everyone feels accepted and feels honored for whoever they are, whatever their beliefs are, and that they feel that they can be open and genuine, and that there's that sense, and that we're modeling that as leaders, and then therefore helping our employees to then embrace and be more open, because it is we have probably one of the most diverse environments in technology that not a lot of people have seen that, and so for them to see, okay, this is what it can look like, this is what it means for me to be more accepting and to be open to people that are different than I am. I think that kind of, we want to model that and show that we lead by example. But again, that goes to, it's not just about being open and supportive of transgender, it's being open and supportive of all. And so then if people see that, if we're being open and giving opportunities to people, so for example, just a few stats for WP Engine, so you know, 65% of, 65% of our executive team are women. 31% of our non-executive management are women. 33% of our organization is non-white. And about 30% of our organization does not have a college degree. And so we have a very, very diverse in terms of socioeconomic background as well as just overall ethnicity background. About 9% of our employees identify as non-straight, self-identify. And so, you know, again, so we're trying to create an environment where people feel comfortable, you know, being themselves and see that, hey, we're doing that. So then, in the case of, specifically in terms of transgender or non-straight employees, them seeing again, hey, we're not treating them any differently, we're very supportive, we're, you know, making sure that we feel like there's an open environment for them to be themselves.
Do you think because of your reputation, you're at a competitive advantage in the hiring market?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're getting incredible talent, and people who know that, okay, I don't have to deal with some of the BS I have to deal with. I don't have to pretend about who I am. I don't have to, hide. I can just be myself and be productive and get down to work and be part of a team and be accepted. That is, I think, compelling.
So, Heather, did you say 9% not straight?
Yeah, 9% have self-identified as non-straight.
So, Seth and Amie, we've also kind of laughed behind the scenes about things that maybe people have done unintentionally, didn't know. So give us some war stories about the workplace that we can learn from.
I mean, disclosure is an important thing. This is my information to share. So in the workplace, it becomes challenging when you start to build relationships with people and build an element of trust and want to feel close to folks. But also kind of protect what feels like a secret to some degree. And the reality is that my gender identity has nothing to do with my ability to do my job. And by coming out, I run the risk of creating friction where there wasn't previously. So that, I mean, offices are rumor mills. That's kind of like some of my worst experiences. And I don't have horrible experiences to report, but it's when I trust in someone and I'm either not explicit about, please don't share this beyond this room, or I am and they still take liberties to share elsewhere, which makes for some, like, I've had a couple really awkward conversations with people who have heard about my gender identity through a shared friend, but have never addressed it with me personally. There's a guy that I work out with at the gym, our professional circles overlap, and he approached me last year and wanted to know how I felt about Caitlyn Jenner winning the ESPY. Well, I have feelings, but why the fuck are you asking me? He hadn't disclosed that he knew, and I hadn't disclosed to him personally, and so it made for this. I didn't mean to make him feel like a jerk, but it's like, let's just get on the same page. Why are you asking me? If you value my opinion because I'm trans and you know I'm trans, let's just put that on the table. It's cool. But he kind of danced around it, got really flushed in the face. I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I know that I did not share this with you personally. You must have heard from someone else, and there's like 1 of 5 people it could be, and I'm not upset with them or with you.
One of the things I might interject here is the uniqueness of being trans is you are finally who you always have been. You just had a different body. So I'm not sure, and we've talked about some people don't want to go there. I mean, they're finally who they're comfortable with. They don't need to be out as having been anything else before. So I liked, Aaron had noted, I guess when we met, never initiate that conversation. It is for the person to decide if they want to have it. But that's different from how, that's a very unique perspective from being trans, I think, is that you're finally in your own skin, and kind of all your life you've wanted to just be here, and why do you have to talk about it? These guys, Amie and Seth have really been courageous to come up here and talk about it because it just impacts so many people's lives. The other thing to note is you may not know if someone is trans in your workplace. Sometimes you might think you can tell, and other times you might be surprised. So we just ought to assume that
You have to meet people where they're at.
Yeah, don't be a Donald Trump. Don't talk about it.
Well, and I think it's important to be careful about the jokes that you tell, and all of that, because you never know if you make a joke about Caitlyn Jenner or about there's a meme going around Facebook of Donald Trump all made up in makeup, and if you're sharing stuff like that, that can be incredibly damaging to a trans woman who's not out and doesn't, they've already not felt safe to tell you that, and if that's a thing that's going around in your workplace, you might, and it goes back to like when you're not out and when you feel that kind of pressure to perform your gender in a certain way. You know, I came from a company that was based in East Texas, and they were very like good old boy, and you know there was very much pressure to like, you know, perform masculinity, and it you know, that's like an extra weight that you've got to like perform that while you're writing code, and it makes me a worse developer to pretend to be somebody that I'm not. So I think it's important to think about who you might be affecting by jokes like that.
So what are some of the most rewarding experiences in the workplace, and what are some that you hope we learn from and don't replicate?
So definitely the most rewarding is that, you know, my team, like I said, they all know, you know, I walk in a room and if my face and my height don't give away that I'm trans, my voice does. You know, my team knows who I am and knows what I deal with, you know, and, you know, when we travel, you know, and I'm getting constantly, you know, misgendered by, you know, the ticket takers on the German train or whatever, you know, they've got my back, and, you know, if somebody grabs me on the streets of Prague, which happened, and I, you know, yell something, I've got 6 guys who can back me up, and that is really, really amazing to like have a team that supports me that way.
I feel like I've got more positive work stories to tell than I can really count. I'm gonna call him out here, but Steven Stearman up here is on my team at Student Loan Genius, and he's been working for me a couple of months, and you know, we're a small team. I need him to trust me, and I need him to follow me and believe in what we're trying to do, and part of that is allowing him to know me. So we've been, you know, had a happy hour at the office and ended up in the garage on the way home together, and you know, an opening kind of happened organically in a conversation, and so I came out to him. Bless his heart, he asked all the questions you're not supposed to ask, but I gave him a safe space to ask it. Because again, people tend to be afraid of things that they don't know, and it was a natural knee-jerk reaction. It's like the same way if somebody said to you, a really good friend of mine killed themselves, right? And your mind goes to, well, how? It's not my right to know that, but the natural curiosity is like, I kind of want to pick at this a little bit, right? So he did what came naturally to him, and I said to him, don't ever say that again, right? Like that's, but I'm giving you space to ask these questions because it's natural to be curious about these things. And what manifested and what has happened time and time again in my life is I come out to people and they don't treat me any different. And that's like all I could ever hope for, is that this is just an interesting fact that he now knows about me, and hopefully it makes him a better person out in the world when he goes out and if he hears derogatory terms or comments about Caitlyn Jenner, right, that he now feels empowered. I know a trans person, I like a trans person, I'm gonna shut that shit down. But day to day, Steven, Paul, Miliano, I mean, there are people in this room that I've worked with that I come out to them and nothing changes. And that's really what I'm hoping for, because it doesn't change who I am fundamentally, right? It's part of what makes me who I am all in, but it's not really any more meaningful or impactful to my life than where I grew up or what brands I prefer or what I like to eat. Like, it's all just pieces of me that makes me who I am in total. And so in the workplace especially, to be able to come out to someone and still feel safe and respected and trusted to do my job is really the most important thing.
So what are the 2 questions we're not ever supposed to ask you?
I headed one off, so it's what's your birth name, right? Which is just, again, not really relevant to anything. It's just natural curiosity. And what's in your pants? Which is not anybody's business but my wife's.
Yeah, well, and you wouldn't ask that of any of your other coworkers. So.
Yeah.
Can I just make a comment? So
Yeah.
there's another thing. So a lot of times people ask me about, you know, well, I'm really committed to this as a leader. I want to basically make sure that people know that we're an inclusive workplace. And they say, well, how do we attract more people? And I basically just say, well, then be vocal about it. Like, set an intention and say, we aspire, you know, fill in the blank company. We aspire to be an inclusive, diverse environment. This is what it means to us, and just say it, and then back it up, and you know, just be consistent. But just be, if you're interested in saying, well, we're committed to diversity, And part of that is just, again, first is just setting that intention. So maybe that intention is just starting small with just that, just even just saying it out loud to your current employees, so that perhaps somebody who has not been feeling comfortable or know that the company values them, that they can start to feel more comfortable, and then that message will spread. And if you're backing it up through your actions, then that's going to help you to attract a more diverse workforce and a more inclusive workforce.
Stephen, do you have anything to add to the conversation since you were cited?
I mean, I was taken incredibly off guard, and I had never, to my knowledge, had met a trans person up until that point. And so the fact that he trusted me enough to come like that meant a lot. And it was just kind of eye-opening to know that, it's kind of like you said, now that when I hear people say things out in public, or my friends, or come from Kentucky, where it's not the most inclusive place. And so, it's just really changed a lot of my outlook. And so it's been extremely beneficial. And I just wasn't even aware that I wasn't supposed to ask questions. So I'm learning.
Yeah, how else, so, pronouns, talk about pronouns, so that people here understand the importance.
Sure, so,
Thank you, Stephen.
So both Seth and I use binary pronouns, like I use she, her, Seth uses he, him. A lot of people don't, and so, and especially, I've sat on the other side where I've seen people talking about a candidate that they, an applicant to the company that they didn't know, they couldn't tell, and there was a fierce divide about how that person might identify. And it's just a very simple thing to reach out and say, like, how should I refer to you? That's, because as a trans person, like, my whole life I've lived with, society telling me, like, your body looks like a boy, you should behave like a boy, when someone, every time someone says that, it like chips at my mental health a little bit. So it's really important to just ask people how they want to be referred to, and just follow that.
As humans, we're very much creatures of habit. Misgendering in my personal life has come, and it dates back a while, but it's come from my mom, right? Where she almost instantaneously adopted my chosen name. It was really hard for her to use male pronouns with me because there was 20 plus years of history. I was her first daughter, right? Like, that's who I was to her, and that's how she thinks of me. I would agree. Like a general misgendering is like, it just kind of chips at you, and it's an awkward conversation that we don't want to have, like, over and over and over and over again, especially in the workplace, right, where there's other people around, and it can be a really awkward situation. So for those of you in the room who've chosen to be here and be part of this conversation, I think we've got a responsibility going forward to be respectful about that and ask people what their preferred pronouns are, and to reinforce that elsewhere in the workplace. If you hear somebody misgendering a trans employee, it not only prevents that, like, chipping away at your self-esteem and psyche, but also gives, like, an immense sense of comfort and security, knowing that you've got somebody else in the business that's going to take care of you. Transitioning on the job is really hard. It'd be great if you could just, like, leave one job and transition, knock it out, and be done. But transition is a lifelong process. And it's not something you just, like, flip a switch and it's done. It takes time and it takes a lot of money. And so for a lot of us, we either stop working, and we're fortunate that we have, a partner that can support us through that process. But more often, you work through transition. And so names seem to be much easier for people to wrap their head around and make the change. It's the pronouns that become much more challenging, but know that it carries a lot of weight. That you can give someone a gift by constantly and consistently reinforcing their chosen gender, or you can be a negative element or aspect in their life by misgendering them, whether intentionally or unintentionally.
So what's the right way? I mean, if somebody, and we don't think it's necessarily malicious, but what if I said, I'm referring to Amie, and I said he? How would you intervene there, Seth?
Well, I mean, I probably wouldn't give him the chance.
Well, no, but what if you weren't there?
Yeah.
and I referred to you outside of your presence, what
She.
do we want to do?
Immediately, I would just say she.
She.
Every time you misgendered
Okay.
her, I would correct you.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, a lot of times, when I'm advocating for myself, like, you'll say like, oh, somebody will say, oh, he, this, that, and you'll say she, and a lot of times they won't get it. So a lot of times you have to be a little more deliberate the first time and say like, hey, actually this person prefers she, her pronouns, or actually this person prefers they, their, whatever.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
And which is, first of all, just thank you. I recognize this takes incredible courage for everything you're doing and for being here, and I'm so glad this is happening here and that we get a chance to learn from it, and also for hopefully creating kind of the safe place that you guys talked about, because I know for me, I have questions and some might seem silly or stupid, I don't know, but like one of them is like, I've been in that situation before where I've knowingly, not intentionally, but just like I've misgendered and then immediately realize it. Should I just like stop and apologize? Should I just like blow by it and try not to do it again? Like does it make it worse? I feel like kind of like acknowledging it almost makes it worse. Like
So correct it like you would correct any other mistake in your conversation. Like if you said, Haskell when you meant Python, you would just say, I'm sorry, I meant Haskell, and just go on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
My only addition is it depends on the social situation. I got a buddy from college that I'm actually going to his wedding this weekend. He misgendered me constantly, but we were at his place one night playing poker. A room full of guys that I'm not out to, like 5 guys that I'm not out to, sitting around drinking beer late in the night. I don't know where I am. I don't have a car, so I don't feel totally safe. And he's misgendering me like over and over and over again. I'm trying to like elbow him and give him a hint, but he's been drinking and he's known me for 10 years, so his brain defaults to kind of what he knows, which was she, her pronouns for me. In that instance, I wouldn't have wanted him to like stop and apologize. I was better off just saying like, Andy's drunk, let's keep going, right? Downplay it. So depends on the context.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I have to admire you because it's so, there are courageous things to do, but what y'all are doing is really a courageous thing. And integrity means you stand for something, you fall for anything. And in this case, people are afraid to acknowledge the fact that you may be transgender, and fear is just false evidence appearing real. I mean, you're the real thing. And I just, it reminds me of the astronauts. Our astronauts, when they're launched, they don't know what they're going to see or feel. And that takes a lot of courage. And what you have done is you're really social astronauts. You're the early phase of doing things, going where no man has gone before. In this case, no person has gone before. And that takes a lot of courage and a lot of understanding. And I'm really proud that I made this talk, because I've just learned a lot from listening to you all.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this, is that I want this to be easier for each successive generation of trans people. I didn't know what it was going to be like to be interviewing as myself. I'm sure you didn't know what actually people were going to say when it came out. It's kind of a singularity. But it's important that we kind of do things consciously and obviously, so that the people who come after us have footprints to follow.
That's
Well
courage.
said.
Thanks.
Well said.
The key on the misgendering side, we're all employees, we're all employers, and tacit approval is one of the worst things with misgendering. So if any employee at a company or a manager or any corporate executive hears it, the key is to correct it, because if it goes on, then you ultimately get into Title VII violations and EEOC regulations as far as misgendering and employment, as far as discrimination. So I think it's the responsibility of all employees, and this is an employee setting, obviously with Friends it's slightly different, is that people basically raise their hand and don't allow it to go on, because if it continues, it looks like it's acceptable. And it's, as you guys know, ladies know, it's not acceptable.
I want to talk a little bit more tactically about some workplace issues. I think we talked about establishing a safe and welcoming environment. We hit all those except for the adoption of policies. And, you know, Erin, it might be helpful if you want to contribute here too, because I know you're a key part of WP Engines. So Heather, supplemented by Erin, adoption of policies, when, what kind, where do you go to for resources?
Well, we're definitely in the view of a, as much as we can, no policy, low policy type of just environment in general. So
Right.
only really policy where it really, really makes sense, where it's kind of not, where we're not following, you know, kind of just general, I would say kind of common sense, just, you know, standards. So I would say that for us, we haven't really, we've put together in essence kind of what we view as a philosophy overall around, you know, kind of overall inclusion and an overall philosophy around equal pay for equal work. But there's not necessarily a view around a kind of a specific policy per se.
Well,
And so
did you
I
roll
would
it
let
into your
Erin talk about-
non-discrimination? Do you have a non-discrimination policy at work?
Yes,
And so you just make
Yeah.
sure that that reflects gender identity, gender.
Absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah, so I would say that's one of the first things, like, we don't have a ton of policies, as Heather alluded to at WP Engine, but we absolutely have an EEO policy and a non-discrimination policy, and that's one of the first things that, I did when I started at WP Engine a year ago, is to make sure that was included, but Mike, or you can look at some of that language. Yeah. And it's also one of the first things, I was at Rackspace previous to that, and it was one of the first things I did when I joined Rackspace, was to go and look at that policy and make changes to that policy, because my experience has been that, to already have thought through that level of, you know, that is an example of the level of detail to already think through, so that when someone comes to you and asks questions about the policy, like, it's already there, that they don't have to ask questions, they don't have to push on that, like, that's something that's, we've thought through it, it's already there, that protection is in place, among other thoughtful components of the workplace environment, and so that's something that, you know, we definitely have in place.
And I should have mentioned, Erin Barber is VP of Employee Experience, or
Yeah, lead employee experience.
Lead
Yeah.
Employee Experience, yeah, at WP Engine. We talked about confidentiality from the perspective of Seth told the story, you don't really expect other people to disclose for you. What about you guys? Is there an expectation in the workplace of?
No, we basically, again, we follow the person's lead. So, and also, we've had situations where someone going through a transition and basically following their lead around when do they want to tell us, what role do they want us to play in terms of supporting them, the time frame. It's almost kind of like the way Erin kind of put it, is like working with that person to put together a plan. Like, you know, what's going to be the plan, and that be thoughtful in terms of that time frame. Because, and checkpoints around
Did you
that.
wait for someone, so if someone wants to transition in the workplace, do we wait for them to come to us as managers to talk about this and?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's, again, follow their lead, be patient, know that there might be, this is a very fragile time and a very, they're feeling very insecure about all this, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of fear, so just be patient, listen, and really, again, follow their lead. And then part of that might be that, follow their lead might be that they want to be the one to tell certain people, or they may choose they don't want to tell anyone. And again, that may change. So
Right.
it may be like, first they're very bullish about, oh, I'm gonna do this and this, and then coming back and say, actually, no, I wanna, so again, back to that follow the lead. But I think part of it is like, the very beginning is, back to the whole thing is earning the respect and the right for them to have that conversation with you. So that's really critical. So back to like walking the talk every day and being open. Then saying, okay, well then I know that I can have this conversation and feel like there's a level of trust, and then therefore I'm going to work with you on that. We're fortunate that we have leadership and leadership in our employee experience team like Erin and Sarah who have experience with this, so they're able to also give some suggestions or ask some questions to help the person think through this around how they want to approach it. At the same time, we don't want to be over prescriptive,
Right.
or again, every situation is a little bit different and nuanced. But then we've had that where allowing that person where we've actually played a role in helping to support some of the discussions and some of the education to help soften the discussion prior to then that person having the discussion. So again, I've seen it that way. I've also seen it where the person themselves says, I don't really want the company to have a role in communicating with my peers, I will do that as I feel comfortable. So again, back to like, it's a very personal and very nuanced situation, so just the you being ready to support them.
What do you two say about the importance of support in that situation?
Well, I'm really impressed, Heather, with what you've done at WPN and the approach that you've taken. My initial concern about participating in this panel to begin with was that I'm one guy. Like, I want to do a good job of representing the trans community, but I'm one person with a unique set of experiences. Overall, I have a very blessed life, and I can't give you the full picture of what trans masculine looks like because I'm one person. It creates a challenge for employers, right? And that you can't just put all of us trans people in a category and say these are the policies and process and procedure that we use in this situation, because we're still human beings, right? And Amie, in all likelihood, deals with challenges that I don't, despite the fact that we both fall under the T umbrella, right? I pass, whereas she has to kind of own it day to day in a way that I don't necessarily, and so our experiences are very different in how we want to be treated in the workplace and disclosure and policies. We may have very different opinions on that. So again, kudos to you and WPN for taking the approach of these are all people, trans, gay, straight, black, white, like these are all people. We've hired them for a reason. We want to bring them together and create success as a company, but there's no one rule or policy that you can apply that's going to solve for everything.
Amie, anything to add?
I mean, I think Seth has said it pretty well. I mean, you know, you never know for trans people, you know, what they're, you know, being out at work is one thing, but each of us is a whole person with a whole life. You know, we may have a partner that we're not sure whether they're gonna be supportive or not. You know, I think only 5% of trans partners stick with their partner through transition. You know, we may have unsupportive families. It may be very difficult for us to come out on any sort of schedule because, you know, we have a whole life that may be blocking us from being out.
So it sounds as if the most important part of this is just having established a safe, respectful, inclusive workplace so that our employees can tell us what help they need or how they want us engaged in the process.
Yeah.
Let's talk, so insurance. What do you want to see employers look at for insurance? Because I was told when we started this that there was only one carrier that included transition services, but I've since learned that there's two.
Right. So it's a thing that's gradually increasing, but historically it's been that almost every insurance policy, if you go and look at the certificate of coverage, at the very end in the exclusions, you'll see transition is a blanket exclusion. So that means that all your doctor visits, all your labs, all of your medication, all of that is excluded, and you have to pay for that out of pocket. And so a lot of insurance companies have that you can add on, but you're gonna have to go to your insurance company and ask to add that on. You know, and as a trans person, it's always a challenge, like, you know, hey, like my workplace is really accepting, but we don't have trans health insurance. So, you know, even at moovel, like we've had United Healthcare, which has traditionally been one of the more accepting insurance companies, but it wasn't until the ACA guidelines came out back this spring that we were able to say, yes, in 2017, all transition healthcare will be covered. So,
And my broker told me that it isn't any more expensive, that you just need to know to ask for it,
yep.
which surprised me.
Quick
what,
question.
yeah.
So a lot of us probably don't know, like you mentioned that insurance sometimes or sometimes does not cover the process. A lot of us probably don't know what that process actually is. Could you spend a little time talking about the steps that you go through?
Yeah, so it's going to be different for both of us. So we'll both take a stab at this. So often the first step that you're going to take, either before or after coming out, that's different for a lot of people. Some people will come out and then say, now I'm starting hormones. So hormones means, for me as a trans woman, that means I'm taking a testosterone blocker and then I'm taking estrogen. And there are a variety of ways of doing that. That means that I'm gonna see a doctor every 6 months to get my labs checked because, you know, years and years ago, decades ago, it was a much more dangerous process. Now it's less so, but there's still kind of that tradition of saying like, you know, I'm gonna do your labs to make sure that your liver's not blowing up because of all these drugs that you're taking. And you know, even before that, you know, there are doctors who will say like, if you say you're trans, I will give you trans medications and help you with hormones. But a lot of times you're gonna have to go through a therapist first, a therapist and maybe even a psych to get a letter saying like, yes, I certify that this person is trans and they should receive health care. And then, you know, so hormones do a lot for your body, you know, in terms of making you appear more like what society expects a woman to look like. You know, then there are surgical options after that, you know, including, you know, breast augmentation and, you know, there are a variety of surgeries that can be performed on a person's genitals to bring them into line with what that person wants to have.
So I did a year of therapy. The Harry Benjamin standards of care dictate that you need to do a year of therapy and technically live a year presenting as the opposite gender before you can get your letter to start hormones and have surgeries. I did a year of therapy. I started hormone treatment November of 2005. The medical thing is interesting because depending on what your insurance says and how the doctor codes your visits and the corresponding prescriptions, you can either get like a free pass to zoom right through and insurance will cover everything, and then you're talking about, for me it's like a $15 copay for 10 months worth of testosterone and needles, or you get a policy and a doctor who don't want to play ball, at which point you're paying out of pocket for the doctor's visit, you're paying out of pocket for the hormone treatment, which is plunges and needles and, you know, like there's a whole kit you've got to get. And then on top of that, for me as well, at least for the first 3 years, I had blood work done every 6 months. And if the doctor doesn't want to play, then you're paying out of pocket for lab visits, to go see a phlebotomist and have everything on it run to make sure that, you know, your heart and liver aren't going to blow up or do something awful. I personally had a top surgery, so a bilateral mastectomy. I transitioned in California. I was really fortunate. I had Kaiser Healthcare and a really friendly doctor who said, hey, do you want a hysterectomy? And I said, sure, why not? There's a documentary called Southern Comfort about a trans man, I think in Alabama or Arkansas. But he had his legal documentation changed to reflect that he was male, and we have an insurance that recognized him as male, and hadn't had a hysterectomy. He got ovarian cancer, and no one would treat him. Because on paper he was a man, and men don't have ovaries or uterus or cervix, and the surgery was like 30 grand out of pocket. He died because he couldn't afford to get treated. So it's a complicated situation. I'm now at a point in my life where like I pay for my hormones out of pocket. I'm down to blood work every 18 months, and the doctor and my insurance will cover that. At least the lab work I pay out of pocket for the testosterone, but it doesn't break the bank. But it's complicated, and these two things intersect when it comes time to start considering the change of legal documentation. So my ability to change my gender on my legal documentation from driver's license all the way back to birth certificate is dictated by the state in which I was born. So I was born in California, which has fairly lenient policies. So if I wanted to, I could get my birth certificate changed. Everything shy of that. But some other states require that you have hormone therapy, top surgery, and bottom surgery, regardless of F to M or M to F, before you can legally change any of your documentation. So if you can't afford what could be a $50,000 to $100,000 surgery, reconstructive surgery, as a male to female transgender woman, then you're stuck with the legal documentation with a male marker on it forever, which sucks.
What, you know, HRC has a thing about companies should address dress codes. don't know any companies that have dress codes, so let's blow that off.
You got a dress code here.
I'm the
No
one that
suits,
violated.
no
by-
jackets allowed.
Exactly.
Yeah, we had to finally, it's not a policy, it's not a code, but we had to put forth a view on wearing shoes. Yeah, and I've actually been like fighting it, just like unfortunately the anti-bare feet kind of decided, contingent finally won out, so, yeah.
That raises a good point. There was a lawsuit actually 2 years ago, it was settled. Saks Fifth Avenue had a suit on, part of it was related to dress code. They were trying to force a female employee who was originally male to dress as a male. And that went all the way to, that was in Houston. And they finally settled, it was with Saks Fifth Avenue. So you've got to be really careful on what you have as dress code and how you enforce it, because that's a retail chain and there is dress code. But again, it's the whole misgendering thing. You better be careful on how you implement that.
So outside of the political side of this, and then I do want to drop a little bit about the politics that are coming up in the next legislative session, but what do we do about gender-neutral bathrooms in the workplace? So
Put them in. Lots of
Yes,
them.
put them in. Change the signs if it's that simple for you. You know, I mean, a lot of us are in buildings where we don't control the whole building, and so the bathrooms are out in the hall and they're for everybody to use. And you know, I don't have any good answers for that. But where you do have bathrooms in your suite, please, if they're single stall, just relabel them as gender neutral. It's useful for trans folks who are not out yet, who, you know, really hate walking into the bathroom and saying like, I'm walking into the men's bathroom even though I don't identify as a man, because that's how I appear. It's important for non-binary, genderqueer folks who both options are wrong for them. You know, they identify as agender and just don't have a gender. And yeah, it's important for folks as they're transitioning early on. You know, when I go out shopping, you know, and I have my wife with me, you know, there was definitely a period of time there where like having someone who was going with me into the store bathroom who could say like, this person, she belongs here, you know. But you know, a lot of times at work you don't have that, and so having a bathroom where there's not an expectation of what you look like when you walk in that door is very important.
Chuck, will you say very little about what we're looking at the legislature in terms of, quote, bathroom bill?
Sure.
And for those of you, Chuck is the executive director of, what do we call it now?
Equality Texas.
Equality Texas. I still call it.
Briefly, our Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has publicly said that it is a high priority for him to pass legislation that would require access to restrooms to be based upon gender that's on someone's birth certificate. So he is making it his mission to misgender, transgender people and force them into the wrong bathroom, and I guess he's doing it on the guise that he doesn't want men in women's restrooms, but he would actually be forcing that to happen.
He's doing it under the guise of a wedge issue. I mean,
Yes,
this is
yes, it's all for political purposes.
political cycles. There's wedge issues. This one is.
Anything real.
Yeah.
Yes, to where he is, notwithstanding the history that we have seen and the economic fallout that we have seen in North Carolina, he currently is intent upon passing similar legislation in the state of Texas.
So that brings us to, you know, what does it mean to be an ally? Which it took us a long time to get here. This is really what you wanted to talk about from the beginning. So, I mean, what does it mean to have an ally? And what constitutes an ally?
So on the topic of like bathrooms, it's not a work-related story, but this is my best friend in the world over here, Paul. Back when Lester Pearl was still open on Rainy, right, their men's room, you walked right in. Like you walked right in and there's a toilet and a urinal and no lock on the door. That's like my worst fear. Like incredibly nerve-wracking to be half drunk in a bar full of people I don't know. Like I sit to pee, that's my reality. And to be sitting facing this door waiting for someone to come barging in is terrifying. Paul's been my bathroom buddy, like forever, without question. If I don't feel safe and all I need to do is pee, I know that I've got him. You know, that I can ask him to come and put his back to the door or stand out front, and that I can trust him that I'll be safe for 30 seconds and I can go go take a leak and not have to worry about what might happen. Or in my reality is that I'm a trans guy in Texas, and some people might not like that. And I don't really want to get my ass kicked. So Paul's been a phenomenal ally to me. He takes kind of a permission-based approach and asks if it's okay if he asks questions, and we engage in really healthy, meaningful conversations that, again, my intent is to help him to know me and to help create an ally out in the world. And I feel like we've known each other for years now, and he can now go be confident in the world, knowing that he knows a trans person has some insights into my experience, and that whether I'm with him or not, that I can trust him to protect me and to protect my community at large.
How would someone, if you went into the stall, how would someone know that you were trans?
I mean, in that particular scenario, logistically, it's like if I'm sitting,
There's not a stall.
Blake walked in.
It's a door.
There's no stall. There's no restroom. There's no stall door. It's simply like a self-contained toilet in your own.
Oh,
Right. So on to an ally.
Yeah.
What's an ally? Paul's an ally, obviously.
I think Paul is a huge ally.
Yeah.
I feel like I've created an ally in Stephen. I think having a natural curiosity and compassion for the people around you in general is like a good starting place. And keeping in mind that, again, we're all people. Like, Paul has kids and I do not. I have a responsibility as his friend to like show an interest and show curiosity and empathy for the situation that he's in, with a young child at home, like a whole world that I don't have any insight to. But he's my friend and I love him, and so I make an effort to show an interest. And as allies, I think just showing an interest and letting people know I'm here if you need me is a really good first step. Even if you don't know what to ask or how to behave, to just say, I know you and I'm here for you. If you need me, I've got your back, and I don't know what that looks like, but you tell me when you're ready, and I'll be there. For me, that's what an ally looks like. You're an ally to me, right? You show curiosity and empathy.
Amie?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. I mean, I would say that, like when I came out to my pool team, my pool captain, who is an ex-coworker and a longtime friend, from that point on, like, it was a very small thing, but every time that there was someone new that was joining our team or a new wait staff, he'd been in that pool league for years, and so he kind of knew everybody. He would just make sure to go up and introduce me, and say, this is Amie, she this, or she's new on our team, and make sure and go out and kind of run interference for my pronouns, and kind of, because a lot of times people look at me and they don't know, and so that was a huge thing, and just people who make an effort to have inclusive environments. When Joseph first met me, he was super excited that we were hiring more women on our engineering team, including trans women, and just knowing that is huge.
Can I add to that story?
Yeah, of course.
So when we were building Ride Scout, which is now moovel, I said, we're not only going to hire engineers, but we're going to hire a hell of a lot more women engineers, because there's just not enough women engineers in the field yet. And I wanted women to be role modeling for other women that are in high school and college and even younger, that there's a path. And I didn't know that Amie was transgender until we sat down for our first discussion, because the way I was doing hiring, the technical experts do all the vetting. They do all the times where they put them in the room with a piece of paper and they give them the problem. They have to go through the dilemma, and then they come in the grade and they shoot questions. This is how we were hiring. I was just kind of the last person, so that I could at least say that I met everybody before they were hired. And I remember our conversation, because I think you said it, or I can't remember how it actually came up, but it was stated that Amie was transgender. So I said, wow, okay, well, in that case, have you ever worked for anybody that's been in the Army for 20 years that served in Iraq? And she said, no. And I said, okay, well, you might say something that might offend me in any context as an Army vet, and I might say something that might offend you in any context as a woman who is transgender. So if I say something wrong, or if you say something wrong, let's just have an agreement that we'll just call each other out right then and there. And that's
Higher
how,
probability over here, but that's okay.
Yeah. So what was cool though?
You don't know my friends.
Yeah.
We're all about the revolution.
but the two things I wanna brag about Amie though is that, first of all, when she went through the interview process, when the chief product officer came to me, and I said, okay, well, what do you think? And he said, she can code. She can bang code. And that was it. And I was so impressed that, and I don't know if I was judging the other teammates that for whatever reason they'd have an issue with it, but I was so pleasantly impressed that I was wrong, that they accepted her completely on the basis of her talents and skills, that I was like, well, shit, yeah. And then you fast forward the clock, and I just got to give a shout out to this side of the room. They're sitting very quietly, but the Texas Association of Business, Belinda and Chris Wallace that are over here, they are preparing for the Texas legislature, and they are thinking about the policies and statements of how they come out as a Chamber of Commerce with the state of Texas reference transgender bathrooms. And this is a true story. We started a conference call at, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was down at the house, and I live down at Circle C, it's about 11 miles out. And somebody that was calling in like me put their phone on hold. So this incredibly important conversation suddenly was interrupted by wait music. You're like, I hung up, got in my car to drive all the way in so that I could tell, my opinions about the issue of transgender bathroom and how ridiculous it was that our lieutenant governor is making this an issue. And the sad part, and the good part, but the sad part is when I drove in 20 minutes later, they were still discussing it. And, hopefully I didn't embarrass Belinda or Chris when I raised a little bit of a scene when I got in there. But I basically said, holy shit, are we still talking about this 20 minutes later in this phone call? So I get to testify before the Texas State Legislature in the new session when it comes out. And hopefully put at ease a lot of people who have these non-factual, no experience related biases and fears to just relax, everybody. Relax.
So first thing, Belinda, I'm so embarrassed that I didn't connect the email to Belinda that I know. So we've been emailing, I know Belinda on the outside, but I didn't connect that this was Belinda we're emailing with. So an ally experience, I want to disclose here, I think I told Seth, Stephen and I always buy tables at the Human Rights Campaign dinners here and sometimes in DC. And probably 6 or 7 years ago, the head of HRC, Chief People Officer for HRC, head of diversity, was the keynote speaker, and she had formerly been a male captain in the Air Force, I think. Do you remember that one, Chuck? And we intentionally bring friends of ours who wouldn't normally come to these events. So if I'm not mistaken, I think I remember the 4 couples, but that's not important, that were at the table with us. And it was in the program that the speaker was a trans woman, former captain in the military. So she was a total rock star. And afterwards, everybody at the table wanted to know more about the trans community. Stephen and I knew nothing. We didn't think we'd ever met a trans person. Now here we are supposed to, and for many years, I was kind of the only gay people that a lot of business people in Austin thought they knew in the early 90s. And I was humiliated to not have ever spent any time getting to know the stories of trans Americans, and underwent, taught Tim Gill, and I said, okay, you got to get me around some trans Americans, and have learned. I think that's now the responsibility of leaders. We're very proactive in making sure that we understand the needs of the minority communities and the LGBT community, and time to catch up. And it's kind of like getting famous overnight. When a band is like, oh my God, you got famous overnight. They've been eating beans and sleeping in the back of
overnight
for 15 years. And I know it feels even longer than that for my friends who are trans, that there's an awakening and a respect, but we can catch up. And I think that's an important part of being an ally. So other questions from you guys?
Well, you raise a good point. The HRC has a lot of clout in the corporate space with their annual awards. And so from a corporate standpoint, I think they'll stand up and pay attention if HRC is stating something.
Well, not on, I mean, there is a company, so, you know, there's other legislation coming forward, and it's religious liberties and all that. But last session, we were trying to put together, and Chuck was intimately involved, that Texas Competes, get companies to sign on in Texas that say, you know, don't adopt these proactively discriminatory policies. We've seen what have happened in other states. It's cost them billions of dollars. And there's a very progressive national company that's very visible in Texas, and I was negotiating with them, and they didn't want to sign on to this legislation. I happen to have given them the HRC award in 1992 for being such a progressive organization. And I can be a hothead sometimes. And I told them I was going to go on television and take that award away if they didn't come through, and they came through.
Well, HRC, they took it away from Sachs after that case.
Yeah.
They revoked it.
Other questions? Kara, you do this at Google. What are you thinking about? Kara's in charge of diversity, LGBTQ.
I don't
hiring.
think I would say I'm in charge of Google's.
Well, you focus on LGBTQ recruitment and hiring.
I do. Here in Austin, I work with university campuses in North America, and specifically software engineers. So I love doing your story. And again, you said you're in sales, so I'm assuming. But what I do is I work with diversity and inclusion initiatives with our campus hiring. And so there's actually a couple things I had here. Our team of about 30 people, we've worked with, let's say, about 3 to 4 accounts that I know of right now of candidates who have come through our process. I've personally worked with one student whose name has changed in the process. And so through that, it's in real time. But one of my questions is, because there's such a legal perspective, and I work so hard and long to protect people not to be profiled against race, ethnicity, religion, some sort of thing. We want to make sure it stays out of it. So there's no assumptions. We take assumptions out of our processes so that we can make sure we're protecting our candidates. And so I'm wondering in the hiring process, during that, there was an assumption where I had to refer to Kaylee as she, because I assumed, because she had stated, my name is Kaylee, I immediately said she, and I didn't want to ask because I didn't know if that gets in that legal boundary of assuming. And so it's my question is, are we doing the right thing by reacting in real time and just changing based on what we think? Could we do that better? And the second thing is, I've looked at materials that we have, I've looked at what policies we have in place, and I just want to make sure, is there something I could be doing with my candidate in real time that I could send them and support during the process for them?
So I would say I do know a lot of folks who are genderqueer or who, despite having a name that matches with how they're presenting, you can't always necessarily assume that that's correct. So, I mean, I would love to see, I've got friends who've made great websites that kind of go and explain this, but just go ahead and say, like, how can I address you? Like, just when you're initially collecting that person's resume or whatever, and just make it as freeform as possible. Give them, the option to just write in how they would like to be addressed from the get-go.
Perfect. And then as far as support in real time, like if that's something right now, I'm in real time working with a situation where an intern of ours, and I don't mean to hijack the conversation, but there's an intern of ours that was with us over the summer, and she had a very unfortunate experience at Google, right, where we have been very publicly in support, and we have a lot of things, but different interns and even people that work for us made different comments about, things that they shouldn't have said. And so we're working on coming back with resources for this person. And so if there's something that you know, I guess I'm working on that resource right now of to be able to pass like a one sheet on what Google's doing in this space.
Is the audience the person who's been impacted, or is the audience the people who are your employees? And is the audience your entire workplace, or is it just for this individual?
For me, the audience I'm referring to now is I want to make sure that any candidate moving forth that's coming through our hiring pipeline, that my team is prepared to send that person a resource through our process to support them. And so I guess it's just if there was something when you were going through hiring process and interviewing, and we did say, you know, how do you prefer in this? If my colleague now says Kaylee, I prefer she and her. If in that process is there something that I could send her, now that we've had that conversation, something that so that she knows that we have her through that hiring process, and here's our resources. Was there something that would have been helpful to you?
So the companies that I've looked at, you know, most of the time, like, I'm gonna make an assumption that almost every company is just like not gonna understand or not gonna care. But so the companies that have something up front that says, you know, here's an FAQ about our hiring process, and have a bullet point that says, provide us with your pronouns and the name that you prefer to be referred to by, and we will respect that all the way through. Like that's something that I would want to see up front, you know.
So I think I'm hearing you say that just make it part of the general doc, one bullet point.
Well, and even just like the website that you have that accepts those just
Jobs.
Yeah, the job site or even your about page, just say like, hey, like let's go out and get out in front of this and say like, here's who we are as a company. We want everyone who works here to have the freedom to be who they are and support that from the get-go. You know, and as an employee who works at a company, that feels good. And for me, looking at, you know, other companies that I might want to work at.
What?
You know, like
we are hiring for some reason.
Yeah, we are too.
Well, she's got this ridiculously inclusive of it. You know, I do want to bring up, and Aaron, I asked Aaron and Heather if we could say this here. I was impressed, and Tina is another colleague of theirs who's on the leadership staff. Between Aaron and Tina, a lot of experience in different places with trans employees and helping employees transition in the workplace. And Heather experience as well. And they've said that they and WP Engine would be happy to be a resource for any of the rest of us that are looking for, you know, best practices.
Maybe that's another session like that.
Yeah.
Actually, I would really like that.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, little
Look at this.
things like how you submit your information. It's not work specific, but I remember I was just starting my transition, and the woman I was dating at the time, we were going on an Olivia cruise, which is like a lesbian cruise line. And it was kind of terrifying for me, like trying to embrace this new identity, but I was still female bodied. And on the registration form, like it had an option for me to indicate that I identified as F10. That was meaningful. So on an application process, to be able to say my legal name is this, but these are my preferred pronouns and my preferred name, that gets out in front of it as a big. Because my question to you is, why does the employee need it? Why does the candidate need a resource? Right. What I want to know as an applicant is, what are you going to do as a company and an employer to protect me and take care of me? What are your policies that if I find myself in a situation where someone's misgendering me and I'm an intern and I want to rock the boat because I just want to keep my job, who do I go to? What is the policy, what is practice for me to go and get taken care of? And I don't, you know, my individual needs may vary based on where I'm in my transition, but I want to know as an employer that you're committed to taking care of me and have a rough idea of what that looks like.
There's no signs that Seth is like this extreme sports kind of guy, right? Yeah. Belinda, you had a question?
Yeah, well, first I wanted to say thank you very much to Seth and Amie and Heather for sharing so much great information and you know, creating a greater understanding for me, I know, and lots of people here. One of the things that I'm proud to do at the Chamber is make sure that we're preparing to prevent legislation that would, you know, make you less comfortable to be the people that you are in Texas. And I appreciate the invitation that you extended to Eugene for us to be here because I would like to make sure we're connecting with other people who would be willing to be resources because we will have, a lot of
Absolutely.
a challenge. As Chuck pointed out, we're fortunate we get to partner with Chuck, but we know that it's going to take a large share of the Texas business community to make sure that people who feel as though other people should live the way that they think they should live are not the ones who get to make the decisions about how our legislation is made.
So for you guys to know, the lieutenant governor is threatening people who obstruct the passage of this legislation.
Yes.
Lieutenant governor is by far the most powerful elected official in the state. So he has explicitly threatened business organizations and other electeds if they become an obstacle to this legislation passing. Thank gosh we have a speaker who, the House could stop this, but kind of like President Obama told me early on when we wanted some stuff done, he goes, you got to make me do it. And so the business community, the speaker can't do it and retain his position and his support unless the business community overwhelmingly tells him he must do this. And we need to overwhelmingly tell even people in the Senate, which is not going to matter because they're going to pass it. But we need to fortify those members of the Senate to at least have some trepidation about this, and maybe we'll turn one or two of them. The only chance of stopping the same things that passed in North Carolina and Indiana are through Speaker Strauss's office. Chuck, you agree with me?
That's true. And the lieutenant governor has publicly said that he doesn't care what business thinks.
Right.
That he has said bad things about Texas Competes, and said that they will not be held hostage by the business community.
Right.
So you are absolutely correct that it's currently all being placed on Speaker Strauss's shoulders, which is not a position that he likes to be in. And so it is incumbent that, as you said, there needs to be overwhelming business opposition to take us down this road.
An analogy to this is I was, Apple has 6,000 employees in Austin, almost 7,000 now, and the huge campus out in North Austin. And I was out there the other day having lunch with my friend Tony, who runs Austin for Apple. I'm like, oh my God, we're so lucky you're here. And all of a sudden I remember the only reason that they're here and not in Round Rock is because in '92, Williamson County said, we're taking away your tax abatements because they had passed domestic partner policy in California and we're going to apply it. So because of that discrimination, Apple's now here. We have 7,000 employees, incredible tax rolls. Companies will leave Texas if this stuff passes. South by Southwest is very worried about it because people will boycott coming to this state. So, listen, our time is up. Thank you, all three of you guys, very much. There are some beers, some pops back here. I know Amie and Seth said that they could stick around a little bit. Heather and I both have to get to other events. I've got to go do a bond thing for the mayor, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, see you again. Yeah, good to see you.
Hey Eugene, will you hold the mayor to make the formal comments till I get there too?
Yeah.
I'll be right behind you.
All right, I'm on my way.
I just want to spend a few minutes and work over the TAB a little harder.
Good. How are you?
Good. That was great.
Thank you for coming.
Eugene, I have to say hello. Thank you so much for delivering. This is so